Hey guys, welcome back to Little Boy Customs. Today we're going to be welding the front half of the bed back onto the rest of the bed. Stay tuned. So a little piece of advice if you're doing this same project at home, it is a lot easier to put the front half of this bed onto the back half of it if you have two people. You can do this by yourself. I did it by myself. But if I could have phoned a friend and somebody was available to come over and help me do this, I would have most certainly done it. So I will explain how I got the front half back onto the back half. I didn't record any of that because honestly it was really not worth watching. So in order for me to lift the front half of this cab up and marry it up to the back half of this cab, I used a hoist that's up in my rafter, and then I went and got one of the larger toe straps, and as you can see over in this corner over here, I'll zoom in so you can see it. I just hooked it into the front half of the bed where there was a hole at, and then I raised the bed up vertically as tall as I wanted it. Now because the strap is on the inside and not really distributing the weight where it will roll like this, the front half of this leans forward. So then I went and grabbed some more straps and just hooked into that front lip right there and hooked into what was the center hole, and then just ratchet strapped it and brought this on up and closer. Now then I have a whole bunch of these from Harbor Freight, and so I decided that's what I was going to use in order to pin the two of them together. And as you can see, the seams aren't too terribly bad. They're slightly off, but not too terribly bad. And I just pinned the whole thing all the way down. Now there is some areas down here at the bottom where it's a little bit wider. So even though I used a laser and used a cutoff wheel in order to cut this, it's still not exactly 100% perfectly straight, but it is pretty close. It's close enough for me to get it welded back together. And if nothing else, you can weld these here pretty easily, but whenever you get gaps like this down here, so what I'll do is I'll grab a piece of metal, a small piece of metal, and just put it on the back side of this and weld that in. And that should fill that gap in right there. So once we get this all welded in, we will do a test fit of the bed onto the truck, and we'll start getting some measurements in order to know how tall we need to raise the floor to get over this hump right here. All right guys, we're fixing to start welding. I've actually started welding on this bed, but if you've ever welded before, you'll skip forward just a little bit, and I'll put a time marker of where you need to skip forward to right here. But if you haven't ever welded on a car before, stick around just for a second with me because I want to show you something. So I've already started welding on this bed, and this is the process that I go through to find out what I set my welder up at, and then how I weld body panels onto cars. So this right here is the cutoff piece, that the center section where we cut out. Most welders that you get nowadays, brand new ones, unless you're buying a used one, will give you one of these gauge tools here. If you don't have a gauge tool, you can always pick one up at Tractor Supply or something like that, or even a welding shop that's in your area or whatever. These are easily attainable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what the thickness is of the metal that I'm working with. In 1967, I have no idea what thickness they used. I know it's a lot thicker than what today's cars are. So I took the cutoff piece that we removed from the bed. I took a wire wheel and I took the burr off the edge of it, and then I'm going to use this gauge and find out what size of thickness it is. It's not a 16 gauge. That's not going to go on. 14 gauge goes on, and there's a little bit of slop in there. So it's in between, so I'm probably going to be right at a 14 gauge. Or at least that's what it says for my gauger. So if you have a wire welder that you've just recently went out and purchased, whether it's a flex core or a combo like this one here, most flex core wire welders are also combo welders. And it's not just this brand here. I also have a Farmhand 115, and it has the same thing on the inside of it. If you open up the door, you'll see a guide right here. What you're going to do is you're going to want to go down and find out what gas mixture you're using. For me personally, I'm using the no shield gas required. For in other words, it's flex core wire. That's what I'm using. I'm using the 0.03, and if you look up here at the top, it has a bunch of different thicknesses for you. Now this one here doesn't show a 14 gauge. The closest one to it is a 16 gauge, which would be the most common gauge used. And so I'll just go down, and it shows exactly where your welder should be welding at. Your settings. Set them on there. That's a good starting point. That doesn't always mean that your welding habits are going to match up to that perfectly, but it's a good starting point. So I've already kind of started on this, which we'll do a time lapse of me welding here in just a second. But here's what you do. Most of the time when you're welding two pieces of metal, you would start at a location and then you would just build a nice little molten hot spot, and you would just keep that going and keep working it all the way down. On cars, you can't do that. What happens is when heat is introduced to metal, it will actually start expanding that metal. And on a car, it will actually start warping that metal, and it's hard to get that metal to get back into shape once it starts warping. So on cars, what you do is you tack weld everything. You would start here and you would just tack weld, tack weld, tack weld, tack weld, tack weld, tack weld. As you see, that line's probably about 2 inches long. From there, I know that my metal is starting to get hot now. So the next thing I'm going to do is, instead of continuing on welding down through here, I'll pick out a new location on the bed and start welding that location. And I will weld a small little section there and then continue on. And then after I get down to the lower end of it, I'll come back up and see if the top half is cooled off. And if it has, then I'll start welding at that location again. And I'll continue to do that until I match all my welds up. So that's how you weld a car.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding. From the words I spit, so sharp, so freezing. So cold, behold, frostbite they feeling. I could tear you apart or I could go heal them. Don't believe in fate, don't believe in ceilings. I just need a taste and my mind starts peeling. I don't pace myself, I grind on kneeling. Got lust for change, I just love the feeling. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. And I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. Cause I'ma live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me.
Well, would you looky here. We got both sides welded up. Looks pretty good. It's not too terribly bad. I did get a little overzealous on some areas and got the metal a little too hot, like right in here. Got into a little bit of a hurry. I shouldn't have, but I just got impatient. Now, I have not welded the inside of the bed up yet. I'm probably going to weld that area right there. And I'm not sure I'm going to weld this here too, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that right away. So I have a couple things I'm thinking about doing. Let's check out the other side real quick. Looks pretty good too. Doesn't look bad at all. So I'm pretty happy with that. Take a grinder from here and grind all the little spots down, and including this spot here, the whole line. Just make it look a little bit better. And then that'll be pretty much done. Other than putting maybe a little Bondo in that area if I wanted to smooth it out, or, you know, just painting it, whatever. Keep it from rusting. All right, guys, I'm pretty stoked that we got the bed finished. I'm not cutting anything out on the back side of it yet because I want to put the bed onto the truck and see how it all looks. By my measurements, if I don't cut anything off the back side of it, then the bed will be just as long as what the car Grand Marquis was originally. So it won't look too terribly bad on the frame, and I won't have to cut hardly anything off the frame. I'll cut a little bit, but not as much as what some other people have done. So still need to do the inside floor, and after doing more thinking and that kind of stuff, I'm looking for another bed just so that I can get the floor out of that other bed. It doesn't necessarily have to be a this year model. I'm going to go run around to some wrecking yards and things like that and see if I can't find a bed somewhere. I don't care what make, model, or year. I'm just looking to get a good, clean looking floor out of it. So planning on doing that over the weekend and part of next week to figure out what I'm going to do. That'll do it for this episode here. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. And I hope you learned something today. Mainly how to weld on a car. It is a lot different than welding on bigger sheets of metal and that kind of stuff. So if you want to send me stuff or whatever, we now have a P.O. box. It's down in the description. Check that out. And until next time, thanks for watching. Be safe.